If you have $300,000 saved for retirement, the standard advice says you can safely pull about $1,000 a month out of that account. That number can feel small, almost discouraging, especially when every headline tells you that you need $1 million just to retire safely. But there is a variable missing from that simple math, one that can quietly cut your real buying power by close to 30% before you even reach your 80th birthday. Most experts will tell you that if you do not have 7 figures sitting in your accounts, you are behind. Then they try to fix that anxiety by selling you a guaranteed income product, usually an annuity, wrapped in language about peace of mind and safety. Today we are looking at why $300,000, $600,000, and $900,000 are actually far more powerful than the $1 million myth suggests. As long as you avoid 3 specific traps built to skim money off the top of what you already worked for, I am going to show you the exact monthly income each of these 3 tiers can produce in 2026, including a new $6,000 tax deduction available to anyone over 65. But more than that, I am walking through what I call the annuity erosion trap, a single decision that has cost some $300,000 savers more than $40,000 in lost purchasing power over 20 years, without them ever noticing it happening. I have sat with people who did everything right on paper and still felt behind because the finish line kept moving on them every time they checked the news. That feeling is common. It is not a sign that you planned poorly. We are starting with the $300,000 portfolio, the tier where people usually feel the most embarrassed about their number. It is also the tier where the biggest math mistakes happen, and where fixing one decision buys you years of security. Let us start there. At a 4% withdrawal rate, $300,000 pays out about $1,000 a month. On its own, that looks thin. But add the average 2026 Social Security check, which now sits around $2,000 a month per person after this year's cost of living increase, and a couple brings in roughly $5,000 a month before tax. That is close to $60,000 a year, which covers a real mortgage payment, groceries, and a car note for most households in this country. But that number only holds if you protect the floor underneath it. For a $300,000 saver, the goal was never explosive growth. The goal is a floor, a baseline income that shows up every month, no matter what the market is doing that particular week. Growth is what happens with the money above the floor, not the floor itself. This is exactly where the annuity trap starts. A lot of advisors will look at a $300,000 balance and suggest carving out $120,000 of it to buy a guaranteed annuity, one that might pay around $800 a month for life. It sounds safe. It sounds like the anxiety goes away. But that $800 a month is usually fixed, and fixed income has an enemy that never takes a day off, which is inflation. Here is the mini-math. That annuity pays $800 a month today. Assume prices rise at an average of 3% a year, which is close to the long-run average. In 20 years, that same $800 check only buys about $443 worth of goods and services in today's dollars. You didn't lose the $800. You lost almost half of what it could buy. The alternative most people are never shown is a bond ladder, built from 2026 Treasury securities that adjust with inflation. Instead of locking $120,000 into one fixed contract with surrender charges, if you need the money early, you build a ladder of bonds that mature in different years, each one handing you cash on a schedule you control. You get a similar floor of income, but you keep ownership of the money, and you can adjust the ladder as prices change instead of watching your check quietly shrink in real terms. I used to think annuities were the only way to sleep at night once your balance felt smaller than you wanted. Then I watched a client realize, 10 years into retirement, that she could no longer afford her property tax bill because her guaranteed check never moved while everything around her kept getting more expensive. The guarantee was real. It just wasn't enough. Social Security itself gets a cost of living adjustment of 2.8% for 2026, which helps that half of your income keep pace. Your annuity does not get that same adjustment unless you paid extra for an inflation rider. And most people either don't know that option exists or skip it because it lowers the monthly check. Think about what a fixed $800 check actually has to cover over time. Property taxes climb most years. Grocery bills climb. A basic car insurance renewal climbs, whether your income moves or not. A bond ladder can be rebuilt every few years using new rates and new maturities, so the income underneath you has a real chance to keep pace with those bills instead of standing still while everything around it keeps rising. But what if your number is double this? At $600,000, a new problem shows up, one that has nothing to do with running out of money. At $600,000, you start entering what I would call the tax danger zone, where the government claws back a chunk of the Social Security check you were counting on. At $600,000, the math shifts from can I afford to live to how much of this will the IRS actually let me keep. Required minimum distributions start at age 73, and by the time you reach that age, withdrawals from a traditional account this size can easily push you into a bracket where up to 85% of your Social Security becomes taxable. Picture a couple with $600,000 in savings. Using the standard 4% guideline, that produces about $2,000 a month, or $24,000 a year. Add $3,500 a month in combined Social Security, and their total income lands around $66,000 a year. That is a comfortable number, but depending on how that income is structured, a large share of it can get taxed twice over, once through ordinary income tax on the withdrawal, and again through the portion of Social Security that becomes taxable once combined income crosses certain thresholds. Every dollar you pull from a traditional 401k or IRA counts as ordinary income. Once your combined income crosses a certain line, the IRS doesn't just tax that withdrawal, it also makes more of your Social Security check taxable at the same time. It's a double squeeze, and it lands hardest right in this $600,000 range, where you've saved enough to generate real income, but not enough room to comfortably absorb both taxes at once. This is where a strategy called the tax bracket bridge earns its name. In the years between when you retire and when required minimum distributions begin at 73, your income is often lower than it will ever be again. That gap is a window. Moving money from a traditional account into a Roth account during those years, a bit at a time, means paying tax now while you're in a lower bracket. Instead of later when required withdrawals, force your hand and stack on top of Social Security. There's a new variable helping this math work better in 2026. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act added an extra $6,000 deduction for anyone 65 or older, which phases out above $75,000 in income for a single filer or $150,000 for a married couple. For a couple who both qualify, that shields an extra $12,000 from tax altogether, which makes moving money into a Roth account during that bridge window cheaper than it has been in years. There's also Medicare hiding in this bracket. Push your income too high in the years the IRS looks back on, and you can trigger what's called an income-related monthly adjustment, a surcharge that raises your Medicare Part B premium well above the standard $202.90 a month. And depending on income, as high as $689.90 a month per person. Nobody plans for that until the letter shows up. This decision comes with a real cost, and it's worth naming plainly. Paying tax today on a Roth conversion can feel like handing the IRS money before you have to. But the alternative is letting that same balance grow untouched until 73, then being forced to pull it all out on the government's schedule, at a tax rate you don't get to choose, while your Social Security gets taxed right alongside it. If you're in this $600,000 middle stretch, and the idea of taxes quietly eating into decades of saving bothers you, that's exactly the kind of math we dig into on this channel, so it's worth staying subscribed. $600,000 is a story about defense. But at $900,000, the story flips completely. It stops being about whether you have enough and starts being about whether you can let yourself spend it. $900,000 sounds like the tier where the anxiety should finally stop. In practice, it often doesn't. This group frequently reports the highest anxiety about market crashes of anyone in these three tiers, even though they have enough saved to absorb far more risk than the $300,000 or $600,000 saver. Take a couple I'll call David and Sarah, 62 years old, with $920,000 saved. They live comfortably on $5,000 a month, but ask them to spend an extra $1,000 a month on travel while they're still healthy enough to enjoy it, and they freeze. Not because the math says no, because somewhere in their head, every dollar spent is a dollar that isn't there for the emergency they can't name yet. There's a real difference between what I'd call the fragility path and the resilience path. On the fragility path, every dollar in the account feels equally fragile, so every withdrawal feels equally dangerous, and the natural response is to underspend for the rest of your life out of fear. On the resilience path, you decide in advance which dollars are protecting you against a specific risk and which dollars are free to be enjoyed, so a market dip doesn't threaten your ability to eat or pay for care. That fear carries a cost, too, even if it never shows up on a statement. An extra $1,000 a month is a grandchild's plane ticket, a kitchen repair that keeps getting put off, or an anniversary trip that never gets booked. None of that spending would have put David and Sarah's retirement at risk. It just felt like it would, because nothing in their plan told them the difference between money they could spend freely and money that was already protecting them against something specific. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, about 70% of people turning 65 today will need some form of long-term care during their lifetime. That's not a small tail risk. That's closer to a coin flip landing against you, and the cost of that care, whether it's a home health aide or a facility, is the single largest unplanned expense most retirees will ever face. The fix isn't a product, it's a label. Carve out roughly $200,000 into a dedicated, liquid account set aside specifically for health and care costs down the road. That account isn't there for the market's best day. It's insurance you already own, sitting in cash and short-term holdings instead of a policy with premiums. The remaining $700,000 becomes what I'd call permission to play money, because it's no longer standing guard against a risk you've already covered somewhere else. David and Sarah didn't get richer by doing this. Their $920,000 balance was exactly the same the day after as it was the day before. What changed was that a market drop on the $700,000 side no longer felt like a threat to their care in 10 or 20 years, because that risk had its own dedicated bucket. That's optionality, and it's worth more to most people at this stage than another percentage point of return. But there's one thing that can rattle all three of these tiers at once, no matter how well you've structured your buckets, and that's the belief that Social Security is heading to zero in the 2030s. Let's run a stress test. It's 2032, and the Social Security Trust Fund runs dry, exactly as the current trustees' report projects if Congress doesn't act. Benefits don't disappear entirely, but under current law, they would need to be cut automatically to match what's coming in through payroll taxes, which current estimates put at around a 22% reduction across the board. Almost nobody runs this next comparison. Even with a 22% cut applied, someone who waited until age 70 to claim still receives a higher monthly check than someone who claimed at 62 and kept their full, uncut benefit. Delaying isn't just a bet that the system survives untouched, it's a cushion against the version where it doesn't. Here's why that holds up. Each year you wait past your full retirement age adds roughly 8% to your monthly check, locked in for life, and that increase gets calculated before any trust fund cut ever gets layered on top of it. Run the numbers. Claim at 62 with no cut at all, and a typical benefit lands around $1,500 a month. Claim at 70, take the full 22% cut, and that same work history still produces something closer to $2,060 a month. The person who waited comes out ahead even in the worst-case scenario being discussed in Washington right now. This works in both directions. If Congress shores up the trust fund before 2032, the same delay decision still pays off, because waiting permanently raises your benefit regardless of what happens in Washington. You are not betting on one specific outcome. You are building a plan that holds up whether the cut happens, gets reduced, or never happens at all. I don't have a crystal ball for what Congress will eventually decide to do, and honestly, nobody does, no matter how confidently they talk about it on television. But I do have a calculator, and running the math for a 22% cut isn't pessimism. It's what a careful plan looks like when you're deciding when to file. This isn't a reason to panic about your claiming age in isolation from everything else we've covered. It's one more variable in the same floor you built back at the $300,000 tier, the same bracket math from the $600,000 tier, and the same care bucket from the $900,000 tier. Stress testing the worst case doesn't mean betting on it. It means you're not caught flat-footed if it happens. So how do you actually start putting any of this into practice? Here are 3 moves you can make regardless of which of these 3 tiers you're sitting in. There's a well-documented bias behind why so many people freeze instead of act, called loss aversion. Research on this goes back decades, but the practical version is simple. We feel the pain of a $10,000 drop in our account roughly twice as strongly as we feel the joy of a $10,000 gain. That's not a character flaw, it's just how the brain is wired, and it explains why checking your balance during a rough market week can wreck your whole mood for reasons that have nothing to do with your actual plan. The shift that helps most people isn't a spreadsheet, it's a change in what number you look at first. Stop opening the account and checking the total balance. Start checking what that balance translates to as monthly income instead. A portfolio that drops 15% in a bad month still produces almost the same monthly floor it did the month before, because that floor was never tied to daily price swings in the first place. Watching the income number instead of the balance number changes how the whole thing feels. From here, there are 3 moves worth making, no matter which of these 3 tiers you're in. First, calculate your actual floor, meaning your Social Security, plus whatever reliable interest or bond income you have coming in every month, written down as one number. Second, make sure your 2026 tax planning actually claims the $6,000 senior deduction if you or your spouse are 65 or older, since it's easy to miss if your tax preparer isn't looking for it specifically. Third, if you already own an annuity, pull out the contract and check the surrender schedule, because knowing exactly what it would cost you to exit is different from assuming you're stuck. I remember sitting with my own dad, looking through his 401k statement together. He didn't care what the S&P 500 had done that year. He wanted to know one thing: whether he could keep buying the good steak at the butcher without thinking twice about the price. That's the entire exercise, dressed up in simpler clothes than most financial media wants to admit. Whether you have $300,000, $600,000, or $900,000 saved, your retirement was never going to come down to one single number. It's a series of trade-offs between taxes, inflation, and your own peace of mind, and the tier you're in just determines which trade-off deserves your attention first. You have more room to work with than the $1,000,000 myth wants you to believe. A $300,000 saver who protects their floor and skips the annuity erosion trap. A $600,000 saver who uses the bridge years before 73 to get ahead of the tax squeeze. A $900,000 saver who labels their money instead of guarding all of it equally. None of these people need a bigger number to feel secure. They need a clearer plan for the number they already have. If any of this changed how you're thinking about your own accounts, staying subscribed to this channel means more of this kind of math, without the sales pitch attached. Retirement isn't the end of the road. It's just a different way of driving. See you in the next video.